Hey, welcome to another hour of Overnights here on TalkTV. If you're expecting Petri, then, well, she's away at the moment. She's not ill. She's just away, having a little bit of a holiday. She'll be back very soon. Normal service will be resumed. Do not adjust your sets. This hour, we're going to talk in more detail about what we can expect from the funeral cortege, and also the kind of schedule, what's actually going to happen and at what time, with Victoria Mitzi. She'll be along again. You saw her in the first hour. And we'll talk a bit more about that. You heard Bob Morris in the first hour talk about the constitutional changes and traditions as well. And I think that's a massive part of it. We'll see a lot of pageantry, a lot of references to previous state funerals as well, as we say goodbye to the Queen. And your memories too are so important on this show. 0344 499 1000. Your texts and tweets have been absolutely lovely so far. Please keep them coming in. I will read them. Talk 87222. I say talk. Put talk at the beginning of the text, and then we will receive them here in the studio instantly. Tweet at TalkTV and at Johnny Gould. I'll look forward to reading them. And we're going to talk now also about your health and well-being. It's been a very intensive week of national mourning, and I've asked every one of our callers who've phoned in on this issue what you're actually mourning. Has it re-triggered your own feelings of mourning for someone you've lost in your own life? A dear parent, an uncle, God forbid someone younger than you? Or is it just that you love the Queen so much, as so many millions of us did, that really it's about mourning the old lady? Because whatever age you lose someone, whether it's a vicious, terrible, malicious loss of someone who's very young, which hurts so deeply, and you think about the potential of their lives that weren't able to be lived, or whether it's an old person who has completely completed their mission on Earth, and I think we can say that about our dear Queen, it's still a loss. It's still about the change in your life moving forward, that uncertainty, that mixture of loss and fear. So we're going to talk about supporting each other in grieving, moving on from this collective mourning period, and explaining that loss to children, which I'm very interested in as well with young children, as we talk to psychologists from digital platform Goldster, which is a digital platform for healthy aging, and she's the founder of the Happiness Foundation. It's Kath Temple. Hello, Kath.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me on.
Oh, it's a pleasure, and it's a very, very important subject at this time, as finally we lay to rest our dear Queen, and we end the period of national mourning. And who better to ask, because you have 25 years of experience as a psychologist. Tell us about the Happiness Foundation, first of all.
The Happiness Foundation actually began through grief. So it began through unhappiness. I lost my younger brother, John, very suddenly. And I always think that we can do something. When bad things happen, we can do good things with that energy, and we can transmute it, we can transform it, and something good can grow and be in the world because of what has been difficult for us. So I set up the Happiness Foundation to salute my younger brother, who was a wonderful man, community relations manager at UMIST, University of Manchester, Institute of Science and Technology. And so the Happiness Foundation began because of my brother's death. So from difficult times, good things can come. I really believe that.
A tribute to him, and what better motivation could there be to continue the goodness in the world that obviously he produced. Tell us about this national mourning. Is it healthy?
It's an interesting time, isn't it? Because since Diana's death, we've not seen that outpouring of grief again. So, and she died 25 years ago now, a much younger woman. Our Queen lived another 60 years longer than Princess Diana. And I think collectively, when there is a
We've had a little bit of a
that
freeze.
other people share our feelings. So that can be a very comforting thing for a person to know that you aren't on your own, that there are many people across the nation, probably across the world, who are sharing in that sense of loss. So that can be a good thing. I also think that there's a fine line to be drawn, that we can overdo it. And of course, our media has been flooded with imagery and with the sad music that comes with such state occasions, with the pageantry and the rituals, which of course help us. We like predictability, and we like predictability in uncertain times. So the ritualistic nature of the loss of a sovereign can be very good for us, but we can overdo things in grief. Which is not so healthy. If we're going over and over and over again, any negative neural networks in our heads, this can lower our serotonin, the happy hormone, and it can increase our cortisol, which is the stress hormone. So there is a balance, isn't there? And the media have a responsibility for that. But so does each individual have a responsibility for that.
Indeed, and I guess the responsibility must come from within, because we in the media...
We can play in some of the Queen's speeches and imagery. It's a good thing to remember with gladness, not just sadness, and to celebrate a life, not just mourn a death.
And that's it, because we in the media are not under orders exactly, but this is the main event. And we've been charged with filling airtime up until tomorrow with this process, and it is a kind of vacuum. We have to talk about this over and over again. And so if you are a perpetual watcher of us, and it's great to have you along as always, dear listener and dear viewer, you have to take the responsibility yourself to perhaps sometimes pull away from TV and collect your own moments of meditation, your own life, because, you know, we can't be the responsibility for that if you keep watching.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Johnny, that there are times when we have to go into ourselves,
Yes.
reflect for ourselves, and to keep our lives in balance. And that's our personal responsibility. And I get that the media, and it's very obvious to me that everybody's been given this brief to be there to do the mourning as a nation for this period of time, this 10 days prior to the funeral. And in personal grief as well, the funeral is a big event in anybody's life, obviously a bigger event, given that it was our sovereign of 70 years. But there's a powerful moving forward from that funeral, I think, for everyone. You know, that the breath is held somewhat until the funeral takes place. And I think for our royals, for King Charles, for his siblings, for his children, for the Queen's grandchildren and great-grandchildren, there will also be, with all of the sadness, a collective sigh of relief that actually we can move forward having honoured this national mourning period.
Because that's right, isn't it? I mean, there has been a longer lying in state for the Queen than other significant members of our society. Of course, Winston Churchill, indeed King George VI. It's as though they've worked out some kind of factor based upon her length of service, her popularity, and the amount of people they calculated would shuffle past her vigil, her funeral, her coffin. And it's perhaps come at a bit of a cost, hasn't it, to the wider society? Because is there perhaps a gentle thought that maybe it's gone on a little bit too long? Am I going to get thrown in the tower for this?
I'm with you. If you are, you're not alone. Because I do think it's probably gone on quite a long time. Having said that, you know, I bow my head in shame if anybody is offended by that. She has been our longest serving monarch.
No, I don't mean any disrespect, and nor do you, you know.
I'm with you. No disrespect. But we can overdo things and overindulge mourning periods.
Because other cultures, Kath, this is a very important point. Other cultures have this period of mourning after the burial. So, for example, in the Muslim or Jewish faith, bodies are buried sometimes within 2 hours, sometimes in the afternoon, sometimes the next day, depending on obviously the nearest and dearest and their proximity to the passing of that person. And then there's no wake. It's like the mourning period starts. So what has been going on with the coffin still above ground is done in memory of that person having endured, commemorated the actual burial itself. And that does change the psychology of this, doesn't it?
It does. Each religion has a different way of mourning. And I've been part of different faiths mourning processes, and it is interesting, it's really humbling and so on. And as you say, in some cultures, with almost dizzying speed, a body is buried. I do some work in Gibraltar, and I have the Happiness Foundation in Gibraltar too. And if someone dies before a certain time in Gibraltar, they're buried that day.
Gosh.
From a British perspective, Gibraltar is of course British,
yeah.
but someone who lives in the United Kingdom, to be coping with a loss and having to call everyone to say there's a service at such and such a time today, and people to organise their lives around that, it is quite daunting as a prospect. Or it would be to me, but with each different culture, with each different religion, that people are inculcated into those ways of being. And so it's probably comforting that there is a ritualistic process to go through for grief. And in where people are not religious, or perhaps spiritual rather than religious, it's rather looser. And so in a way it can be more open-ended and more difficult for people. So where there is a period of mourning that's kind of determined, that can be very helpful to people. And of course, with a religion comes social support.
Yes.
The people around you, and which would help you to deal with the expectations of that particular way of grieving, that particular time for mourning, those particular rituals to go through. And that can be helpful. Social support matters a lot. And you can see the camaraderie that's developed in our queues to see the monarch laying in state, that there's been friendships forged, times shared, even David Beckham in the crowd there, queuing with everyone else. Yeah. And I'm sure he was talked half to death by the people around him. But again, very helpful to hear people sharing memories, sharing their experiences, sharing their particular viewpoint, and so on, all gathered together for all those hours on their way to walk past the Queen and salute her and give thanks for her service.
Indeed. So the most unusual mourning in the world has to be that of King Charles, Princess Anne, Prince Andrew, Prince Edward, and her grandchildren, because the cameras never switch off. Not only that, King Charles is mourning his mama whilst getting a new job. I mean, the whole idea would send any normal person crackers. It's just as well he's had an apprenticeship lasting 50 years.
Long time.
73 years.
Yeah. And taking to the throne at a much older age. His mama was very young when she took to the throne. Yeah. I remember reading some things about Winston Churchill and his guidance of the Queen, though she was a wise old soul, I'm sure, even when she was younger. But Charles has been raised for this. And of course, when an older person dies, there is an expectation that that's the right order of things. When a younger person dies, that there's that shock value, and it's almost like the universe has gone wrong in some way. But when an older person dies, it is to be expected to some extent. It doesn't make the shock of the passing any less difficult to manage, but it has all been rehearsed from the civil servants down. This has been a well-planned, from the media's point of view as well.
Thank you so much.
A very well-planned programme of events that will take place over this period of time. And for Charles, that will have been known about the knowledge, the certainty of certain things taking place can also be a comfort. That continuity, that predictability that I mentioned a little bit earlier can help us to grieve, but very difficult when a camera is almost permanently pointed at you. Little nuances of body language and so on being picked up for all of the royals, not just for King Charles. And of course him expected to carry on his duties, a big public event, or private but public event tonight of all the visiting dignitaries at Buckingham Palace that he's hosting. So there's an element where he has to put a brave face on.
Of course.
And,
Kath, can I just ask you about mourning? Because obviously he's had, I should say, years to contemplate this moment, and yet in the moment when it happens and what he has to do, even though he has looked extremely well prepared and ready for this moment, there will be emotions stirred up that he couldn't possibly have negotiated in dress rehearsal or preparation. What do you think from your experience, Kath, this week has instructed him in that he perhaps didn't know before? Can the loss of someone in the instant be instructive and change you for the rest of your life?
As human beings, we have vulnerabilities. Whether we're allowed to show those vulnerabilities is a different matter. And of course, the royals are less used to showing vulnerabilities. I think King Charles is a resilient man. He's been through lots of things in his life and he's suffered many losses. He was very close to the Queen Mother and he negotiated and navigated through that. But his mother has been a great guiding force, as was the Queen Mother, in fairness to our Queen Mother too. A great guiding force in his life, and probably someone to whom he always turned for advice, guidance, to be able to offload in such a private way, knowing it would never get out to anyone, that his mother would never, ever share anything like that. She was such a private person and honoured all confidences. That is a great loss, to not have that confidence. He has his beloved wife, of course, and he has his siblings as well. I think he's close to Princess Anne of all of the siblings, but it's still a tremendous loss. And however much you've prepared for something, it can still come almost like a kick in the stomach.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it.
Towards the end, yeah, absolutely.
I know this from my own personal experience of loss. I've lost several people in my life, but my dad obviously was a very big one, which I still live with, and my grandma was a very big one, both of my grandmas. But my grandma was 87 and a happy person and went out like a light over quite a short period of time. But my dad was a bit young and didn't really want to go, and lived life very fully and with great joy, but sadly wouldn't even be very old now. And that was a kick in the gut, and I've never quite, or at least I live with it and remember him. And even today, I got set off when I was in the supermarket, and it was 20 years ago. And, you know, this kind of period of national mourning, even though it is unrelated in a sense, does provide you with neural connections to moments of tragedy within your own life, doesn't it, Kath? There's no getting away from that, is there?
Absolutely. There's a lot of people, even Joe Biden tonight, when he talked about the loss of the Queen, did reference the loss of his mother and father.
Yeah.
For all of us, really, that other losses can be triggered. In psychology, we call that state-dependent memory. State-dependent memory. That the chemistry, the neurochemistry, I want to say the neurotransmitter, and there is a trance in all the neurotransmitters, will make all the memories coded with that sadness that perhaps someone's feeling, all the memories coded with the same neurotransmitters, the same neuropeptides, will become very available to people. So we'll go from remembering your father, remembering your grandmas, remembering people that you've lost, And that's how it works for all people as well, that we get within our own minds this ability to traverse from one neural pathway down to another, coded through the state that we're in any given moment, on any given day. But with this extended period of mourning, our own griefs are triggered, along with a sense of loss about our queen. So, and just as you say, your grandma had a great, we would say, a great innings. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Queen has had a tremendous life and has left the great matriarch, hasn't she? The great matriarch has left, after a life of extraordinary service, 96 years of age.
Yeah.
I was at a funeral for another incredible 96-year-old, inspiring woman just on Friday there. And this is just a personal thing. We have to remember that great life with gladness. Gladness.
Yes.
Celebration of a life. And for your lovely dad, who left the world much, much, much younger than that. My dad too. Oh, Johnny, my dad was 56 when he died, and a great shock, a larger-than-life character, as your father sounds too. That's the wrong order of things, it always seems to me, when someone younger dies. And there's something that's easier to accept, still difficult, nevertheless tough, but slightly easier to accept, the right passing, when we're at the right kind of an age where we have a sense of a fulsome life, well lived, and time for transition. And that can make a death easier to accept. When it's a young person, it's much more difficult. I nursed my father, I nursed my mother, and sadly I nursed my young son-in-law, who died in lockdown. There were doctors to see him, and by the time they did, the cancer had taken a real hold, and he was just 35 years old.
Yeah.
So that's different, isn't it? That the death of a younger person is rather different to the death of an older person. It doesn't make the loss any greater, because those big figures that have been constants for decades can be a great loss when we lose that sense of consistency, that ongoing presence of someone in our lives. But it is the right order of things.
Kath Temple, beautiful words, and thank you very much for that consultation, not just to me, but to the nation. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Kath Temple is a psychologist from digital platform Goldster, Foundation of the Happiness Foundation. And just to give you an idea of her background, as you probably heard, someone who deeply understands the science, the biology of mourning. She's a solution-focused psychotherapist, a neuro-linguistic programmer, a master trainer, a hypnotherapist, emotional freedom, master trainer, PTSD and trauma recode specialist. Profound knowledge from Kath Temple, and I hope that was cathartic for you.